perfectly natural. She wanted to meet her birth parents. It was supposed to be a joyful reunion, a chance to fill in the missing pieces of her identity. The family was excited. Stephen and Alyssa welcomed Katie with open arms, and she even moved in with them temporarily. But what started as a heartwarming family reunion was about to become something so dark and twisted that it would end in multiple murders across 3 different states. Because you see, there was something about Stephen Plattle that his family didn't fully understand yet. Picture this: a teenage girl finally meeting the parents who gave her life. Katie Plattle's reunion with Stephen and Alyssa seemed like a fairy tale at first. She moved from Connecticut to North Carolina to live with her biological family and get to know her siblings. Stephen, then 40 years old, appeared to be a loving father making up for lost time. He was attentive, caring, and seemed genuinely happy to have his daughter back in his life. But Alyssa began noticing things that made her uncomfortable. Stephen was spending an unusual amount of time with Katie. He would take her places alone, buy her gifts, and seemed almost obsessed with her. At first, Alyssa tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was just trying to make up for the years they'd lost. Maybe he was overcompensating for not being there during her childhood. However, the situation escalated quickly. Stephen began showing signs of possessiveness over Katie that went far beyond normal paternal concern. He didn't want her talking to other men. He became jealous when she showed interest in boys her own age. And then, something happened that would change everything forever. Stephen began sleeping in the same bed as Katie. When Alyssa confronted him about this inappropriate behavior, Stephen became defensive and angry. He claimed he was just being a loving father, but Alyssa knew better. She could see what was happening, and it terrified her. The breaking point came when Alyssa discovered that Stephen and Katie were having an intimate relationship. Her husband, the father of her children, was engaging in an incestuous relationship with their biological daughter. Alyssa was horrified, disgusted, and felt completely betrayed. She demanded that Stephen end this relationship immediately and get help. But Stephen refused. In his twisted mind, he believed what he was doing was love. He told Alyssa that she didn't understand, that his relationship with Katie was special and meant to be. The woman who had stood by Stephen through years of marriage suddenly found herself living with a stranger, a man capable of actions she never could have imagined. The situation reached a breaking point when Alyssa gave Stephen an ultimatum: choose between his wife and family, or choose Katie. Stephen made his choice, and it wasn't the one any rational person would expect from a father and husband. What happened next will haunt you. Stephen Plattle chose Katie over his wife and family. In July 2017, Alyssa filed for divorce, unable to continue living with a man who had crossed the most fundamental boundary of human decency. She moved out, taking their other children with her, leaving Stephen alone with Katie. But Stephen wasn't content with just an inappropriate relationship. He wanted to make it official. In January 2018, Stephen and Katie were married in a ceremony that violated every law of nature and society. Katie, now 20 years old, had been completely manipulated by the man who should have been her protector. She was young, vulnerable, and had been groomed by someone she trusted implicitly. During this time, Katie became pregnant with Stephen's child. Think about that for a moment. A father impregnating his own daughter. The child will be both Stephen's son and grandson, Katie's son and brother. It was a genetic and psychological nightmare that Stephen seemed completely oblivious to. But here's what investigators would later discover about Stephen's psychological state. He wasn't just a man who had lost his way. He was controlling, manipulative, and had a history of problematic behavior that his family had overlooked for years. Neighbors reported seeing Stephen's increasingly erratic behavior, his possessiveness, and his anger issues. Meanwhile, Katie gave birth to a baby boy named Bennett in September 2017. The innocent child was the product of one of the most disturbing relationships imaginable. Stephen doted on Bennett, seeing him as proof of his love for Katie. But something else was happening. Katie was beginning to realize the magnitude of what she had gotten herself into. As months passed, Katie started to understand that her relationship with Stephen wasn't love, it was abuse. She began to see how he had manipulated her, how he had taken advantage of her vulnerability and her desire to connect with her biological family. The fairy tale reunion had become a nightmare, and Katie was trapped in a situation that seemed impossible to escape. She started reaching out to her adoptive father, Anthony Fusco, the man who had raised her with genuine love and care. Anthony had been devastated when Katie chose to live with her biological family, but he never stopped loving her. He could see that something was wrong, and he wanted to help her escape. But Stephen wasn't about to let Katie go. He had already lost his wife and other children because of his obsession with Katie. In his mind, she was all he had left, and he would do anything to keep her. When Katie started talking about leaving, Stephen's behavior became increasingly threatening and unstable. The warning signs were all there, but no one could have predicted just how far Stephen would go to prevent Katie from leaving him. Here's the moment that changed everything, and this is the twist I promised you at the beginning. In March 2018, Katie finally found the courage to do what she should have done long ago. She told Stephen she wanted a divorce. She wanted to leave him, take Bennett, and try to rebuild her life away from the toxic situation she had been trapped in. Stephen's reaction was immediate and terrifying. He flew into a rage, screaming at Katie that she couldn't leave him, that they were meant to be together, that he wouldn't let her destroy their family. Katie was frightened, but she remained firm in her decision. She had finally realized that what Stephen called love was actually imprisonment. But Katie had no idea what Stephen was planning. On April 11th, 2018, while Katie was away, Stephen made a decision that would shock investigators and horrify the public. He murdered his own 7-month-old son, Bennett, suffocating the innocent baby in his home. Stephen then hid the tiny body in a closet, like a piece of evidence he was trying to conceal. Think about that for a moment. A father killing his own child, his own grandchild, simply because he couldn't accept that his inappropriate relationship was ending. The baby, who had never asked to be born into such a twisted situation, became the first victim of Stephen's rage. The next morning, April 12th, Katie and her adoptive father Anthony Fusco were traveling together in Connecticut. Katie had finally reached out to the man who had been her real father all along, and Anthony was helping her escape from Stephen's control. They were planning to pick up some of Katie's belongings and start fresh. But Stephen had other plans. He had armed himself with an assault-type rifle and was tracking Katie's movements. He knew where she would be, and he was determined that if he couldn't have her, no one could. At around 10:30 a.m., Katie and Anthony Fusco stopped at a stop sign in New Milford, Connecticut. It was a quiet intersection, the kind of place where nothing terrible ever happens. But Stephen was waiting for them. What happened next lasted only seconds, but destroyed multiple families forever. Stephen opened fire on the car with his assault rifle, shooting both Katie and Anthony multiple times in the head and upper torso. The woman he claimed to love and the man who had actually loved and protected her were dead in seconds. But Stephen wasn't finished. After murdering the two people who represented Katie's chance at freedom, he turned the gun on himself. 3 lives ended in a matter of minutes, all because one man couldn't accept that his sick fantasy was over. The discovery of the crimes sent shockwaves through multiple communities. When police conducted a welfare check at Stephen's home in North Carolina, they found baby Bennett's body hidden in a closet. The innocent child had been dead for over 24 hours while Stephen was planning his final act of violence. The investigation revealed the full scope of Stephen's crimes. He had murdered his own son, his daughter wife, and her adoptive father in a multi-state killing spree that defied comprehension. 4 people were dead, including an innocent baby, all because one man refused to accept that his inappropriate relationship was ending. The impact on the surviving family members was devastating. Alyssa Plattle, who had tried to stop this nightmare before it began, was left to mourn the loss of her daughter and grandson while grappling with the horror of what her husband had done. She had lost her entire family in the most traumatic way possible. Anthony Fusco's family was left to mourn a man who had died, trying to help the daughter he loved. He had raised Katie with genuine care and affection, and in the end, He died protecting her from the man who should have been her protector. The case raised difficult questions about how such a situation could have developed. How does a father become so twisted that he sees his own daughter as a romantic partner? How does a young woman become so manipulated that she agrees to marry her biological father? And most importantly, how could this tragedy have been prevented? Mental health experts who studied the case noted that Stephen showed classic signs of a manipulative abuser. He had isolated Katie from her support system, convinced her that their relationship was normal and loving, and gradually escalated his control over her. When she finally tried to break free, he responded with the ultimate act of control: murder. The legal aftermath was swift but hollow. Stephen was dead, so there would be no trial, no justice in the traditional sense. The families were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives, while the public struggled to understand how such a horrific crime could occur. The Stephen Plattel case stands as one of the most disturbing examples of familial violence in recent memory. It shows us how manipulation and abuse can escalate to deadly levels, and how vulnerable young people can be exploited by those who should protect them. Katie Plattel was a victim from the beginning. She was manipulated by a man who used her natural desire to connect with her biological family against her. She was young, trusting, and had no way of knowing that her father was capable of such evil. When she finally found the courage to leave, it cost her everything. This case reminds us that the people who hurt us most are often those closest to us. It shows us the importance of recognizing warning signs of manipulation and abuse, and the necessity of supporting those who are trying to escape dangerous situations. As we remember Katie, Anthony, and baby Bennett, we must ask ourselves, how can we better protect vulnerable people from predators who hide behind the mask of family love? How can we create systems that recognize and respond to these warning signs before they escalate to violence? If you found this case as disturbing as I did, please share your thoughts in the comments below. What warning signs do you think were missed? How could this tragedy have been prevented? And don't forget to subscribe to True Crime Chronicles for more in-depth coverage of cases that shake us to our core. Until next time, stay vigilant and protect those you love. January 6th, 2016. Two best friends meet for coffee at an upscale cafe in Jakarta. Within minutes, one of them would be dead. But this wasn't a heart attack or allergic reaction. This was murder. And the killer? The woman sitting right across from her, watching as her friend took her final breath. This is True Crime Chronicles. Today, we're examining one of Indonesia's most controversial murder cases, a story of friendship, jealousy, and betrayal that would captivate an entire nation. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that this story involves real people and real tragedy. Myrna Salihin was a 27-year-old woman with her entire life ahead of her. She deserves to be remembered as more than just a victim. The case I'm about to tell you involves Jessica Kamala Wongso and Wayan Myrna Salihin, two Indonesian women whose friendship would end in the most unthinkable way. This story has everything: international intrigue, courtroom drama, and questions that remain unanswered to this day. But what makes this case particularly chilling is how ordinary it began. Two friends meeting for coffee, something we've all done countless times. Yet beneath the surface, something far more dangerous was taking shape. To understand what happened that January morning, we need to go back to where it all began, in the lecture halls of Billy Blue College of Design in Sydney, Australia. Jessica Kamala Wongso and Wayan Myrna Salihin first met as international students in 2008. Both were Indonesian nationals pursuing their dreams in Australia. Jessica was studying design, while Myrna was focused on her career aspirations. By all accounts, they were inseparable. Friends described them as the kind of pair who did everything together: studying, socializing, traveling. Jessica was known to be outgoing and confident, while Myrna was described as more reserved but incredibly kind-hearted. But even in those early days, some friends noticed something troubling. Jessica seemed to have an intense need for Myrna's attention. She would become visibly upset when Myrna spent time with other people, particularly men. After graduation, both women returned to Indonesia. Myrna settled into her new life in Jakarta, working and building relationships. Jessica, meanwhile, seemed to struggle with the transition. She had difficulty finding stable employment and appeared increasingly isolated. Then, in late 2015, Myrna shared exciting news with her friend. She was engaged to be married to her boyfriend, Arif Soamarko. The wedding was planned for the following year. Jessica's reaction to this news would later become a crucial piece of the puzzle. January 6th, 2016 started like any other day in Jakarta. The city was bustling with its usual energy, and at the Oliver Cafe in the Grand Indonesia shopping mall, staff were preparing for another busy day. At around 5:30 p.m., Jessica Wongso arrived at the cafe. She was there to meet Myrna and another friend, Hani. This was supposed to be a casual catch-up between old friends. But from a moment Jessica walked in, something felt off. Cafe staff would later testify that she seemed nervous, fidgety. She kept checking her phone and glancing toward the entrance. When Myrna arrived with Hani at approximately 6 p.m., the three women embraced and settled into their seats. They ordered drinks. Jessica had a fruit tea, Hani ordered a coffee, and Myrna chose an iced Vietnamese coffee. Here's where the story takes a chilling turn. According to witness testimony, Jessica insisted on ordering the drinks for the table. She specifically requested that Myrna's coffee be prepared a certain way, and she personally carried the drinks from the counter to their table. What happened next was captured on the cafe security cameras, footage that would later become central to the prosecution's case. At approximately 6:20 p.m., Myrna took her first sip of the iced coffee. Within moments, she began to show signs of distress. She complained that the coffee tasted bitter, unusual. She took a few more sips, then suddenly began to convulse. Hani immediately called for help, but Jessica's reaction was different. Instead of showing concern, she appeared to be watching intently, almost as if she was waiting for something specific to happen. Within 15 minutes, Myrna had collapsed. She was rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. She was pronounced dead at 8:15 p.m. that evening. The death of a healthy 27-year-old woman after drinking coffee immediately raised red flags. Jakarta Metropolitan Police launched an investigation the following day. The initial autopsy revealed the cause of death, cyanide poisoning. But this wasn't just any cyanide. It was a lethal dose that would have killed Myrna within minutes of ingestion. Investigators faced a crucial question. How did cyanide get into Myrna's coffee? The cafe had no history of contamination, no reports of other customers falling ill. This was targeted. As detectives began interviewing witnesses, a disturbing picture emerged. Multiple cafe staff members reported that Jessica had been acting strangely that evening. She had specifically requested to carry the drinks herself, and she had been alone with Myrna's coffee for approximately 40 seconds. But the most damning evidence came from the security footage. Frame-by-frame analysis showed Jessica making subtle movements while handling Myrna's drink, movements that prosecutors would later argue were her adding poison to the coffee. 3 weeks after Myrna's death, on January 30th, 2016, Jessica Kamala Wongso was arrested and charged with premeditated murder. The motive, according to investigators, was jealousy. They alleged that Jessica had been in love with Myrna's fiancé, Arif, and had killed her friend to prevent the wedding. But Jessica maintained her innocence from the very beginning. She claimed that she had no reason to harm Myrna, that she was happy about her friend's engagement. The question was, who was telling the truth? On June 15th, 2016, the trial of Jessica Kamala Wongso began at the Central Jakarta District Court. The nearly 5-month, 135-day trial was broadcast live and became a national spectacle. This wasn't just a murder trial, it became a media phenomenon. Indonesians were glued to their televisions, following every twist and turn. The case had everything: beautiful women, poison, betrayal, and international intrigue. The prosecution's case seemed straightforward. They argued that Jessica had been planning Myrna's murder for months, driven by jealousy over her friend's engagement. They presented evidence of Jessica's suspicious behavior, the security footage, and expert testimony about the cyanide poisoning. But the defense fought back hard. Jessica's lawyers argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that the security footage was inconclusive, and that the prosecution had failed to prove beyond reasonable doubt that Jessica had access to cyanide. One of the most dramatic moments came when Jessica herself took the stand. She broke down in tears, maintaining her innocence and claiming that she loved Myrna like a sister. "I would never hurt Myrna," she sobbed. "She was my best friend. I was happy about her engagement. I had no reason to kill her." But the prosecution painted a different picture. They brought in witnesses who testified about Jessica's obsessive behavior, her intense jealousy whenever Myrna spent time with men, and her increasingly erratic behavior in the months leading up to the murder. The most damaging testimony came from mutual friends who revealed that Jessica had made disturbing comments about Myrna's relationship. One witness claimed that Jessica had said, "If I can't have him, then she can't either." However, the defense highlighted significant flaws in the investigation. The coffee that Salen drank was neither tested nor produced at trial. It was likely discarded at the cafe soon after Salen collapsed. This meant that there was no physical evidence directly linking Jessica to the poison. After 135 days of testimony, evidence, and arguments, the court reached its verdict. On October 27, 2016, Jessica Kamala Wongso was found guilty of premeditated murder. Jessica Kamala Wongso was sentenced to 20 years in prison for the premeditated murder of her friend Wayan Myrna Salihin at a coffee shop in 2016. But the controversy didn't end there. The prosecution did not convincingly prove that Salihin died from ingesting poison, let alone cyanide. Many legal experts questioned whether the evidence was sufficient for a murder conviction. Jessica's legal team immediately filed appeals, arguing that the trial had been unfair and that the evidence was insufficient. They pointed to the lack of physical evidence, the questionable chain of custody, and the media circus that had surrounded the case. Meanwhile, public opinion remained divided. Some saw Jessica as a cold-blooded killer who had betrayed her best friend in the most heinous way possible. Others believed she was a scapegoat, wrongly convicted in a case driven more by public pressure than solid evidence. The case took another dramatic turn in 2023 when a Netflix documentary titled Ice Cold: Murder, Coffee, and Jessica Wongso was released. The documentary presented new evidence and raised serious questions about the conviction. Jessica has persistently maintained her innocence since she was accused of lacing Wayan Myrna Salihin's coffee with cyanide in 2016. Even after serving several years in prison, she continues to fight for her freedom. Jessica was found guilty of premeditated murder for poisoning an iced coffee served to Myrna at a cafe in Jakarta on January 6, 2016. But questions remain. Was justice truly served? Or was an innocent woman wrongly convicted? Today, nearly 8 years after Myrna Salihin's death, the case continues to generate controversy and debate. There are several troubling questions that have never been adequately answered. First, how did Jessica obtain cyanide? The prosecution never established a clear chain of custody for the poison. Cyanide is not readily available to the general public, so how did a design student get access to such a lethal substance? Second, what was the real motive? While prosecutors claimed jealousy over Myrna's fiancé, friends of both women disputed this. They said Jessica had shown no romantic interest in Arif and had genuinely seemed happy about the engagement. Third, why would Jessica commit such a public murder? If she truly wanted to kill Myrna, why do it in a crowded cafe with security cameras? It seems almost impossibly reckless for a premeditated murder. These questions have led some to wonder if there was more to the story. Could there have been other suspects? Was there evidence that wasn't properly investigated? The case also raises broader questions about Indonesia's criminal justice system, the role of media in high-profile trials, and the danger of rushing to judgment in cases that capture public attention. What we do know is that a young woman lost her life in a terrible way, and another woman's life was forever changed. Whether Jessica Wongso is guilty or innocent, The tragedy has left scars that may never fully heal. The case of Jessica Wongso and Myrna Salihin remains one of Indonesia's most controversial criminal cases. It's a story that challenges us to examine our assumptions about friendship, jealousy, and justice. As we've seen, the evidence was far from conclusive. The investigation had significant flaws, and the trial was conducted under intense media scrutiny. Yet a woman was convicted and sentenced to 2 decades in prison. The truth about what happened at that cafe on January 6, 2016 may never be fully known. But what we can say is that the case serves as a reminder of how quickly lives can be destroyed, both for victims and the accused. Thank you for joining me for this edition of True Crime Chronicles. If you found this story compelling, please like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into the world's most fascinating criminal cases. And remember, in the pursuit of justice, we must never forget the human cost of these tragedies. They were just 6 and 9, 2 sisters full of life, laughter, and trust. On May 2, 2001, Mary Faith and Liberty Battaglia were dropped off by their mother for what should have been a simple dinner with their dad. This is Crime Chronicle, where we review crime cases. Kindly subscribe if you haven't. Instead, they entered his deep Elm loft in Dallas and never came back out. Within minutes, he made a devastating move, placing a phone on speaker so their mother, Mary Jean, would hear every moment. Mary Faith, her voice trembling, was forced to ask, "Mommy, why do you want Daddy to go to jail?" Then came her final words, "No, Daddy, please don't," followed by a room full of gunfire. Mary struck 3 times, Liberty 5. After killing them, he didn't flee in panic. He calmly left a voicemail in their bedroom. "Good night, my little babies. You were very brave girls." And then walked casually into a tattoo parlor to mark their roses on his arm. What could transform a father's love into calculated violence? And how did he carry out such an act, then memorialize it in ink? On the other end of that call, their mother listened, frozen, helpless, as her daughters were taken. This is a story of trust betrayed, innocence extinguished, and a family shattered forever. This is Mary Faith Battaglia, age 10, an aspiring artist who loved drawing and horseback riding. Beside her, Liberty May, just 6, shy but bright, loved school and stories. On May 2, 2001, these sisters were dropped off at their mother's Dallas home, ready for an evening with their father. Their parents had been through a bitter separation and a custody dispute, one marked by escalating tension. Mary Jean, their mother, had filed for divorce after enduring verbal abuse and physical violence. Battaglia had assaulted not only her, but also his first wife, sending both to the hospital. Despite this violent past, he continued to see the girls regularly, visiting under a court-supervised schedule. But beneath a facade of fatherly care lay a threat no mother could ignore. Battaglia had been harassing and threatening Mary Jean, triggering concerns he might soon lose his privileges. That night at 6 p.m. in his deep Elm loft, a routine dinner ended in horror. 2 innocent children, less than 10 miles from home, became the victims of an unthinkable act. This wasn't a chance tragedy. This was personal. What breaking point led a father to transform a family visit into their final moments together? For the Battaglia girls, life with their father wasn't all tension. On weekends, they'd visit his deep Elm loft, greeted with art supplies and simple joys. Mary Faith, bright and creative, would capture the world in sketches. Liberty, quiet and sweet, would read aloud from her treasured storybooks at the dinner table. On the surface, it seemed like a father-daughter bond. But underneath, there were warnings. John Battaglia wasn't a stranger to violence. His first wife, Michelle Getty, testified he'd physically assaulted her multiple times, breaking her nose, cornering her, even punching strangers who crossed him. In 1999, days before Christmas, he attacked Mary Jean in front of the girls. He ended up on probation with a protective order banning contact with her. Even after the divorce in August 2000, the control didn't stop. Mary Jean filed for Battaglia's parole to be revoked. He'd been harassing her and violating probation. He texted and called obsessively. He threatened, "I'll kill you." He stalked her social media, and he promised revenge if he lost access to the girls. Bits of this surfaced in court. Mary Jean's tearful testimony, prosecutors' warning of his instability. Yet, despite these red flags, he retained unsupervised visitation rights. On May 2nd, 2001, he pulled up to Mary Jean's Highland Park home. The girls clambered into his car, excited for dinner. What they didn't know was that their mother's voice would soon be their only lifeline. The trip was short, just 10 minutes to the loft they'd come to think of as Dad's place. But as the sun set over downtown Dallas, a dark energy followed him there. What she didn't see, what no one did, was how far he was prepared to take his fury. On May 2nd, 2001, around 6 p.m., John Battaglia arrived at Mary Jean's home in Highland Park under the pretense of a family meal. The atmosphere was ordinary, and so was his tone when he greeted her. He knocked on the door. Mary Jean handed over the girls, smiling as they ran into his arms. But the routine shattered as soon as the door closed behind them. Inside that loft, everything turned. Neighbor Patricia Simmons would later say she heard raised voices. Had it been a domestic dispute? Or something else? Just moments later, other neighbors reported loud gunshots, the unmistakable sounds of trauma echoing through the evening air. In the courtyard below, one witness told police they heard shouting, like a frantic argument, immediately followed by 3 distinct bangs. Another swore it was a single crash, then rapid fire. These accounts would vary, but none could deny the horror unfolding above. From Mary Jean's phone, still connected on speaker. "No, Daddy, please don't." Mary Faith's voice cracked, as a burst of gunfire drowned out everything else. When the barrage stopped, a horrifying quiet settled, alive, then gone. Mary Jean terminated the phone call. She pressed 911. "Operator, 911, what's your emergency?" Mary Jean, "Choke, my husband, he shot our daughters. He shot them in the loft. Please send help." Her voice faltered, tears audible. She whispered their names, Faith, Liberty, please. In mere seconds, police raced to the scene. Inside, officers found both girls. Mary Faith lay motionless on the floor, 3 bullet wounds to her torso. Liberty, 5. No weapon was found at first. Battaglia had tossed it away. He remained inside, in the middle of the living room, wounded but eerily composed. The ambiguity of what happened before the shots fell would linger. Was there an argument? Or did he strike without warning? As responders cuffed him, Mary Jean stood helpless outside. She'd already borne witness to the unthinkable, by hearing when she could not see. At that moment, Mary Faith and Liberty were gone. On the tape of her 911 call, her voice pierces even now. They were so young, they didn't deserve this. This was no tragic accident. It was a calculated act, born of rage and revenge. Within minutes, detectives descended on the deep elm loft. They discovered gunshots fired from inside, the weapon still clutched in Battaglia's hand. Ballistics confirmed it was his gun. He'd fired all rounds himself. Forensic experts matched the shell casings and bullets directly to the father's pistol. Their fingerprints and gloves were bagged and analyzed. No third-party presence. This was a single-actor crime scene. Investigators used fingerprint and touch DNA techniques on the gun and magazine. Every trace pointed to Battaglia himself. More chilling, a voicemail left in the girl's bedroom after the murders. His voice calm, composed, almost boasting. Initial theories pointed to mental illness, depression, bipolar, walking a fine line of sanity. Yet detectives saw something clearer: revenge. This was an act born of anger, not psychosis. Battaglia himself admitted as much during the phone call, calmly stating, "I shot them," after Mary Jean pleaded on the line. He even taunted her with, "Merry fucking Christmas," referencing his prior Christmas assault, a personal attack disguised as family vengeance. Battaglia's legal team attempted to shift blame. citing therapy failures, character witnesses, mental health struggles. Custody documents became a battlefield, but every legal defense crumbled under forensic evidence and motive. The protective order he'd violated, the text messages with threats, these painted a man consumed by rage and control. Booked as an emergency call transcript, Mary Jean's recording captured it all. Faith, ask your mother why she wants Daddy to go to jail. Then, through the gunfire, I shot them. His own confession before he dropped the line. Battaglia was arrested, his weapon in hand, tattooed, roses visible. He offered no denial. But what he did next would stun even the arresting officers. The truth had always been buried in fragments, arguments, court papers, therapy transcripts. But what investigators discovered next wasn't a confession in the traditional sense. It was something colder, something calculated. Just moments before the final shot rang out, he picked up the phone and called their mother. Mary Jean Pearl answered the call, not knowing she was about to hear the final moments of her daughter's lives. Battaglia's voice was steady. Ask your daughter Faith what she just said. In the background, Faith, just 10 years old, tried to speak. Then, the sound that would forever shatter Mary Jean's world. Gunshots. 2. Then silence. On that call, Battaglia delivered his final message to the woman he once claimed to love. I killed them because you always win. This wasn't spontaneous. It wasn't confusion. It was revenge, deliberate, weaponized vengeance, carried out through the murder of his own children, designed specifically to inflict maximum suffering on their mother. Psychiatrists would later call it a textbook case of malignant narcissism. A man whose ego was so wounded he could not bear to lose control of his children, of his image, or of his ex-wife's life. But even among seasoned detectives, this wasn't just an act of control. He didn't just want to silence them. He wanted her to hear it. Was this just revenge? Or was something even darker at work? By the time John Battaglia stood trial, the facts were no longer in question. He admitted what he had done. The question now was why. The prosecution called it exactly what it was: calculated, vengeful murder. Not a man who snapped, a man who planned. He executed his daughters to punish his ex-wife. This was his final act of control. The defense leaned heavily on mental health. Diagnoses were introduced: bipolar disorder, depression, unresolved trauma. But the jury wasn't swayed. After weeks of testimony, the jury returned with a unanimous decision. John Battaglia was guilty of capital murder. He was sentenced to death. For years, Battaglia appealed the sentence. In 2018, 17 years after the murders, his time finally ran out. On February 1st, 2018, John Battaglia was executed by lethal injection. His last words? Well, hi Mary Jean. I'll see y'all later. Bye. But for Mary Jean Pearl, the sentence didn't end the pain. She had already lost what mattered most. Her life, once public, now withdrawn, became a maze of locked doors, security cameras, and recurring nightmares. The community that once stood by in horror never forgot. A scholarship was created in the girls' names. Their school held vigils every May. But there was always a question no verdict could answer. Could this have been stopped? Mary Jean had warned the courts. She had called the police. She told the system he was dangerous. And still, he got unsupervised visitation. In her grief, Mary Jean became a voice for change. She pushed for stricter custody laws in cases involving abuse. And she never stopped saying their names. Mary Faith, Liberty May. Mary Faith loved horses. Liberty May adored school. Their futures were full of light. Until one man's darkness took it all away. The signs were there. There were police reports, custody battles, direct threats. I'll kill you. He said it, and the system heard it, but let him in anyway. So we have to ask, was this preventable? Could tighter custody protections, better domestic violence response systems, mental health screenings, have saved two young girls from an unspeakable fate? Battaglia's final words were meant to taunt, not to repent. This wasn't sudden. It was planned revenge through children against the woman he couldn't control. If someone tells you they're dangerous, believe them, because the next time, you might not get to warn anyone else. What role does untreated mental illness play in domestic violence? What are the responsibilities of the courts when someone shows every warning sign but still gets a key to the front door? This case isn't just about one man's decision. It's about the holes in the system that let him make it. Two daughters, shot by their father while their mother listened on the phone. What do you think could have stopped this? Was this a failure of the courts or a calculated act no system could have seen coming? Let us know your thoughts below. And if you believe no family should ever face this again, share this video to spread awareness. Subscribe for more true crime chronicle documentaries every week. Loudspeaker comment your thoughts.